Okay, hello everybody.
Do we have this speaker?
Yes, this guy. My name is Jessica Block. I am part of the WIFIRE lab at UC San Diego, and I'm moderating the Data-Driven Fire Modeling Panel 1B, investigating how we can develop fast and reliable fire modeling tools to support all fire departments and emergency responders across the state. We'll start with a couple of lightning talks. Adam Kochanski from University of Utah will begin.
Welcome, everybody. My name is Adam Kochanski, and today I would like to talk a little bit about our recent developments and what we have been working mostly on the research stage, but what we kind of start bringing more into operational and prototype stage. And I just wanted to share some of developments that we have recently done. So that's going to be really related to what Dave was talking about, and everything related to the fire atmosphere interactions and the actual coupled atmosphere fire modeling. So before I go into this subject of the coupled atmosphere fire modeling, I wanted just to briefly just touch on just classical approach, which is uncoupled fire modeling. So in this case, generally we would have fuel information, we would have some weather data, we would have some description of the topography, and these three sets of data would be used in a fire model to compute our forecast of the fire spread. So that's one way how you could do that, but you could do something slightly different, which is coupled atmosphere fire modeling. So basically, in this case, what you have is the same set of data, but the biggest difference is that in this case you have a weather model which exchanges information with the fire model. So the weather model provides information about local winds into the fire model. But the fire model also provides information like heat release, moisture flux from the fire, or smoke, and all those inputs go back into the weather model, so the weather model can actually respond to the presence of the fire itself. So by doing this kind of a coupling, you actually can exchange information between the fire and the atmosphere, and you can basically provide additional feedback. So the atmosphere is not really the atmosphere that would be if there was no fire, but that's the actual atmosphere in the presence of fire. The other loop that you can see here in terms of the coupling is through the fuel moisture model. So you can imagine that on the top of this kind of high frequency loop related to just exchanging the information about the local winds and how the fire impacts the local winds, you may also have additional information from the weather model coming straight to the fuel moisture model, and the fuel moisture model then can compute what is the fuel moisture and just drive also the fire spread model. So that's kind of the system. Now there are some interesting features related to that, which is the first of all on the top of just regular fire spread forecast, because you need a relatively high resolution to resolve interaction between the fire and the atmosphere. You also get local very high resolution weather forecast. And when I'm talking high resolution weather forecast, that's like a couple hundred of meters. So that's something that you cannot really get just straight out from numerical weather prediction products available currently. The other thing is that you may also generate out of that fuel moisture product, and you can just estimate what's going to be the fuel moisture next day and so forth. And on the top of that, you can also get some estimates of the smoke dispersion and plume rise and all things related to the emissions. So why would anyone like to go this kind of more complicated path with all those boxes and those interconnects? There is a couple of reasons to do that. The first thing is that something that Craig mentioned about, but Dave as well, is that we can account by doing this coupling for modifications of the local weather because the fire itself. So all the things like fire winds, just generated by just convergence, at the bottom of those convective plumes, acceleration of surface winds, if you have additional vertical mixing in case of those mountain downslope winds, change also in even like onset of like sea breezes and larger scale meteorological processes induced by large wildland fires. Those are the things that we can capture. On the top of that, another aspect is the smoke, and what the smoke does to the local environment, how it changes temperature, how it changes fire behavior. That's also something that we can try to resolve using those type of frameworks. Another benefit of doing this coupling is that it enables really strong coupling between the weather and the fire. And the strong coupling in the sense that instead of having this connection, let's say, on an hourly basis between what the weather forecast says and what the fire does, within this framework we exchange those informations on a time scale of the time step of atmospheric model. So that's like each couple of seconds. So because of that, we can account for changes in the fire behavior due to rapid changes in the weather conditions. So that's additional benefit. And also, this strong coupling enables, for example, resolving spatial variability in weather conditions, and it accounts for that. For example, we may have some spot related to like isolated rain event that will change also fire propagation in a certain region. Now, this high-resolution weather forecast, it's something also important. In complex terrain, you can imagine those type of simulations with high resolution would provide better representation of the terrain, but that's not everything, because this high resolution also allows to resolve small-scale processes, like outflows from thunderstorms, for example, or mountain flows, etc. So there is a lot of benefit, kind of at least theoretically coming out of the system. Now, how actually it's implemented in a modeling framework. So, on the left side, you see a diagram which is, very similar to the one that I just previously commented on in terms of the coupled versus uncoupled modeling. So here we are showing the actual boxes, the actual model. So the blue one, that's the WRF atmospheric model, and you see that it's connected with this orange fire spread model, just providing winds, and then the heat fluxes, moisture, and smoke goes back to the atmospheric model. And the additional 3 connections you see here: air temperature, relative humidity, and precipitation. That's what goes from the atmospheric model to the S-fire fuel moisture model, and then goes to the fire spread model. So at the end of the day, you can do like a simulation like the one on the right side, where you have the actual fire progression being driven by local winds, and you may also have, for example, smoke, and you can look at smoke dispersion, plume top height, and things related to that. So in order to be able to perform those simulations, you need really high resolution, and you cannot really do that just going from super coarse picture of weather conditions down to like 100-meter resolution. So the way how we do that is that we just build like a set of nested domains, and we basically start from something capturing general meteorology and like synoptic conditions, and then we gradually zoom in over our area of interest, building like a set of nested like domains, just zooming over the region of interest. And here you see like this really small orange box just in the middle. That's the actual fire domain, which is embedded within like a set of those outer domains, providing all large-scale processes important that resolve all large-scale processes important from the weather standpoint to actually provide correct weather information at the boundaries of this super small fire domain. So here is an example of a simulation performed for Barker Canyon fire. That's Washington 2012. And on the left side, if you look at this animation, at the bottom, that's the actual fuel moisture map. And at the top panel, you see the fire progression together with smoke. And if you look closer, what really happens is that if you see those colors going to red, orange, which represent low fuel moisture, that's where the fire becomes active. It produces a lot of smoke, and then during the nighttime, where the fuel moisture goes up, it kind of stops and the fire becomes less active. And the same thing is kind of presented on this graph on the right side, where you see this purple line that's like a diurnal variation in the fuel moisture, and the red line, that's the growth of the fire, that's the fire area. So you see that where the fuel moisture goes up overnight, the fire kind of stops down, and then during daytime, when the fuel moisture goes down, the fire kind of starts growing and the fire area increases. So how can we use this kind of framework to provide some forecasting capabilities? So here is a kind of simple diagram showing our WRF-FX system, and there's like a kind of prototype system that uses WRF-Fire as an engine to provide on-demand coupled fire atmosphere forecasting capabilities. So everything, of course, starts from large-scale weather data, information about fuel and topography from the land fire, surface data in terms of the dead fuel moisture, and some input from the user that just defines where the fire is. And it can be either like a point ignition, or it can be the actual fire just which has already certain size. So what happens next is that we can just get this data and weather data plus fuel information in the topography gets just aggregated in our preprocessing system. All the observations from the remote automated weather stations, all the dead fuel moisture data are aggregated here to provide like a spatial map. So we run our data assimilation system to have the spatial representation of the dead fuel moisture, and that gets everything then is directed to our WRF-Fire model that then just generates our fire weather and smoke forecast, which is displayed on the web portal. So, so on the next slide, I just wanted to show you how it looks from the user standpoint. So the user just hits this red button just to initialize the whole simulation, just types in, okay, that's the name of my fire, and basically just selects what is the ignition point, for example. And it can be either done by just clicking on the map or just providing latitude and longitude. Then of course you have to specify what is the time of this fire or of this ignition, what is the length of your simulation, and the next step is just to select what is the resolution of your model, how big domain you would like to have, and once you are done with that, you just press this big red button and you submit the job. So what happens in the background is that all those information, all the data for the fuel, meteorological forcing, etc., everything gets downloaded and gets processed. We in the background generate WRF input files, and we just once everything is ready, just submit our simulation on a cluster. And once this simulation is running, each next time frame which is available in the output file is being processed, and it's just posted on the separate WRF-X portal. And on this portal, user can just click the name of the fire that he simulated, and on the right side there are like all the rasters available with different things like temperature, wind, wind vector, smoke, fire area. And then the end user can just click like a play button and just see, for example, progression of the fire together with smoke, together with wind vectors if he's interested in that, or like fuel moisture or whatever may be of interest. So that's how this system works. Here is just another just zoom in example showing how the actual interface looks like. And I think you have a good idea at that moment, what we are trying to do and what the system provides. So I will just leave it at that. And I guess there's some time for questions, or we will wait till the end. Okay, thank you.
Okay, next lightning presentation is by David Buckley, Vice President of Technosylva, Enabling Wildfire Risk Forecasting, Key Challenges and Lessons Learned. And side note, for those of you who are in with the vendor booths, if you have longer conversations, if you wouldn't mind taking them outside, it's gotten a little noisy. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Jessica. Well, I might as well get this out right away. I'm the dumbest person to grace this stage today, You know, I don't know about a lot of you. I expect some of you are laymen, you have your specialty, but the talent that's been up on this stage today is pretty incredible. And I feel really honored to be up here. Andy Warhol said you get your 15 minutes. I guess this is mine. I'm not sure how I got here. So I'm going to give you a layman's perspective and talk a little bit about moving into risk forecasting, really build on top of what Adam on the fire modeling and what some of the other people have, and try to tie it all together, right? And because we're hearing these terms today, and I love the way Tom jumped on, wherever Tom went, there he is, about a definition. You know, we hear these terms, fire potential, we hear fire threat, fire risk, and it's kind of thrown around, and it means different things to different people. So let's have a look, and for us, and what I'm going to talk about is putting that in a context, as Chief Meacham said, really look ahead. I want to know before the fire starts, right? And we need to shift our focus about that. And so we want to look at risk, and for our discussion today, risk is that possibility of loss or harm. Pretty simple, right out of the dictionary, right? When we say harm related to fires, we typically meaning damage. And a forecast is a prediction, right, of future events. So that's what we're going to look at. We want to look at fire with respect to where it's going to go and what it's going to do, right? And we want to forecast it. Why do we do this? We do this for a variety of reasons. And depending on who you are, whether you're an electric utility company, whether you're CAL FIRE, whether you're a local fire department, you have different priorities. Typically, we were talking about firefighter first and then public safety second, right? It's about lives and homes. That's what we care most about, right? Right? And then there's a variety of other things we can use it for. The electric utilities can use it to justify shutoff. If I can forecast what the risk is incoming and potential impacts of those fires, then I can make some quantitative decisions about when I maybe should de-energize or shut off lines, right? I can use it for EOC activation, enhanced communication. We already saw Chief Meacham and Brian talk about sharing information, whether it's fire simulations or not, right? To really engage and help each other. And then particularly the arrangement of crews. You know, we see when we ramp up for Santa Ana or Diablo wind scenarios that we need to position people out and about, right? And so this is why we need to make these decisions. So we've also talked a lot about weather, and then we talk about fire modeling, right? And then we talk about fire weather, because we're just going to marry them together. And they do connect. We saw a lot of the fire potential index and that. So a critical component for us as really a company that focuses on operationalizing and being that bridge across the chasm between the science and the good research that's done, but then the demand of end users, whether that's a fire department or electric utility is to really operationalize it, right? And to do that, we make a distinction between those really weather forecasting systems and then the fire forecasting system, right? And that's really important because we leverage the work that you saw earlier today from Atmospheric Data Solutions, Scott Capps and the folks at SDG&E and shortly Edison, right? And those forecasts that are done to really be the fuel, if you will, into our fire models. And that allows us to generate risk forecasts and look out ahead of ourselves as opposed to just being reactive. So it's all about being proactive here, right? What are some of those challenges? Well, some of them are pretty obvious, right? We need daily or preferred hourly weather forecasts out for some horizon, 3 days, 5 days, something of that nature. As Matt referred to, we can take real-time weather stations, but what we really prefer is continuous weather data. So we can provide continuous analysis, right? We need good landscape data, particularly you heard a lot about live fuel moistures. We need good characterization of the fuels on the landscape. We deal with very large data sets going in and large data sets coming out, so that whole big data issue. One of the things we need to do is not do one fire model and replicate one. We need to run a gazillion simulations. That's a new unit we now use for fire simulation modeling. It's gazillions. Because we used to say we do 1,000 simulations, we do 100. And before you know it, it was, well, we need to do 1 million. And then we implemented SDG&E, it was 70 million simulations, right? Now we're doing 10, 11 million simulations a day. Edison's going to be 100 plus. Let's just get the numbers out of the way. We're going to do a gazillion simulations because that's what's required, right? We need that ability to be able to do that over and over again and don't really matter on it. To do that, we need the HPC. We need the high performance computing resources. We need those readily available and we need them seamless, right? We have to manage lots of temporal data. It's not a snapshot of one fire. we've got a snapshot of risk across the landscape. And then we have to put it, as I think the last discussion in the last panel was, is we have to help people understand. Even if that's the IC or the fire chief, we need him to understand, although he's totally familiar with it. How do we get that out in an intuitive nature, right? Really, really critical. They're the challenges we face. And they're not all knocked down yet. You'll see some improvements, but it's not there. It's work in progress. I'm going to show you a bunch of maps, so a little bit of housekeeping here. So you're going to see a timeline across the bottom of those maps, and I want you to pay attention to it because it represents 72 hours of weather forecast. And the slashed lines, the color lines, are every 3 hours, where the examples are we're running wildfire risk forecasts every 3 hours. We can run them every hour, but typically we don't see too much difference, and for the processing, 3 hours is nice. They're color-coded by what we call is a percentile of potential damage to buildings. So we run it every hour, all these simulations, as you'll see, and then we calculate all the damages. So right away, when I come in and I look at a 72-hour forecast, I can immediately see where's my trouble period. It might be all Santa Ana, extreme weather scenario, but I immediately know where's the worst, so I can start to pay attention really quickly and look to it. One of the challenges of intuitive interfaces and lots of data. As we saw from the SDG&E weather modeling system, they model 2-kilometer data across most of Southern California, right? And so we see that data temporally for different time slices. You can see I put the little arrows on so you can see that back and forth just so you see the different time slices. I've shown you 3. There's 72 of those, and they get generated every day. What's the essentials for really doing wildfire risk forecasting? Not running a fire model, but running a gazillion of them so I can forecast what risk is going to be. Well, we have to deal with likelihood of ignition. There's a lot of work out there. There's a lot of sensor stuff going on to help quantify that, right? And I'll show you how we can deal with this from a territory perspective. We have to deal with fire spread, right? And we have to deal with consequence. Fire spread has typically been the missing component because it's what tells you what the consequence is. When my ignition, we've often used ignition as our surrogate for risk. Although we didn't know exactly where the fire is going and what it's going to take down, but we're saying if it ignites, it's going to be bad. And we know that's not really the case. It's not always the case. So just as a quick little video about an independent or a single simulation, this is one we did for Chief Fennessy a couple years ago. And it wasn't in real-time response to a fire. This is for educational awareness in Mount Soledad to help people understand what's the potential. What would fire look like? And again, we do it in a 4D terrain with time so you can play with it and zip it around. And it's a really intuitive tool, right? It's kind of dramatic. And as my dad would say, dead sexy, right? Because that's kind of what it is. But it's one simulation. It doesn't give you a forecast. It gives you a forecast of one fire, but that's about it, right? So let's look at what a forecast might look like and how we do that. Let's look at the territory of SDG&E here. So I don't know what the likelihood of ignition is. I don't know what the ignition source is. So let's model everywhere. So every 500 meters, we start a fire. It's about 44,000 ignition points, right? We do that every day. And so for every time slice, again, look at the time bar in the bottom. This is one where there were Santa Ana conditions at the end of October there. We can see this map for that time slice based on a gazillion simulations where the worst prone fires are going to start. All those areas with red in them are fires that are going to take down a lot of houses. Our measure here, and the values at risk we're using, is buildings or structures. So we've run all those simulations in advance so that we can tell you those worst case ignition sources. And we do that every hour. Oop, too quick. So this is an animation. I really slowed it down. Come on, you can do it. All right. Sorry, it's a little slow. Yeah. Let me back up one more. Yeah, one more. Right there. Can you just refresh that? All right, that one's good in the essence of time, right? So this video is not playing. Here we go. So here's an animation. You can see it walking across a time bar. This one's from November 11th. So it's walking every 3 hours. And so it's showing you the risk. And this is during a Santa Ana condition in the 11th that Brian was talking about earlier from SDG&E. You can start to see the troughs of the winds. So again, what the red is showing you, fire started from those locations, right? Not from electric utility, just from the 500-meter grid, are going to cause a lot of damage. The damage might be 10 miles away, but we're really identifying risk associated with the ignition location. And we do that for every time step, every day, running 10 million simulations. There's a variety of other metrics where we can identify the value at risk and light those up. In this regard, we're focusing on the ignition source as the source of risk and associating the number of houses it's going to consume back to that source. So traditionally we think of fire modeling, we think about modeling from a location. This is obviously Santa Rosa and the Tubbs fire. But what about if we didn't model from a possible source and we thought about before the fire, and we model from a layman's perspective, think of it as inverse modeling. We have our key assets, Santa Rosa, and we use the same weather data, the same modeling algorithms, but we model the other way. So we're modeling exposure sheds. So this is 60-mile-an-hour winds. That means anywhere in that green area it's going to take within 6 miles, right? That's going to get into Santa Rosa. If we look at 30-mile-an-hour winds, it's extended. So if you're outside the green area, within 6 hours, it's not going to get to Santa Rosa. In 15-mile-an-hour winds, that's an exposure shed. So if you're outside that green area, it's going to take more than 6 hours to get to you. So we can use the weather information to proactively look at exposure before the fire even starts, and we can model those assets. Think about that map flowing in and out as weather changes hourly, showing you how my key assets, whether they're substations, whether they're transformers, or whether they're communities. And we can do this in advance, hourly, and predict it. No different than the weather map showing all the severe weather that's happening in Sacramento right now. So it's showing my exposure. So let's tie this back to electric utility real quickly, okay? So if I can do that from any ignition location, what about if I only start fires from all those assets, all those conductors, all those fuses, all those transformers? And I run millions of simulations from those every hour. Then I can actually characterize those. And you'll see the time bar move really slowly across there. And what you'll see is predictor overhead distribution light up as we get into the Santa Ana location. So what you're seeing is, as the weather gets worse, the winds get worse, you're seeing which ignition sources are going to cause fires that cause more damage. And so you see them, and it's just running in a loop here, and you can see those. Now this one uses an equal ignition probability from all the ignition sources, all the assets. Of course, what we do, but I can't show you, is add ignition probability based on different equipment characteristics and things like that. So immediately in those situations, SDG and others can make decisions about, wow, we can quantify that this line is more probable to fail, and when it fails, it's going to burn down a lot of stuff. This line up here has the equal probability of failure, but because of where it's going to spread, it's not going to burn down a lot of stuff. We're going to shut down this circuit. And so we can actually really use quantifiable science by forecasting what the impacts are going to be from these fires by integrating that fire spread modeling. Not only can we do that on a map, but now we know what all the impacts are going to be, and we can look at all the different circuits. We can focus on the worst circuit, right? And we can see a risk profile over that 72 hours and say, how does that circuit look like, right? So now we can quantify the statistics that we need based on embedding that fire modeling inside a risk forecasting system. Last few slides here are going to focus on the ability to not only use all these simulations to do risk forecasting, but to do on-demand requests. We see a lot of this. It's mostly what we do, right? And as my partner Joaquin says, it's like giving 2 guns to a monkey, right? This should be left for qualified people who understand and can interpret fire behavior analysis. It's not a tool the public uses, nor should it be. But it allows us, because we have these predictive weather systems, we can now do this gaming or what if and say, wow, we got Santa Ana's, this overhead distribution line's lighting up. Let's run some fires from there and see what kind of damage is going to happen. And so we can do that on demand. And because we can do that on demand, we can run it from any client app you want. So SDG&E has a mobile device. Let's go through a scenario. Randy Lyle, their chief fire coordinator, gets a call. He's on the I-5, pulls over, because he doesn't text and drive, and he already says, hey, here's the location. It's at this address, right? First thing he does. Couple clicks, he can define where that location is, right? Then he can define any characteristics about the fire real quickly, and he can run the simulation. He can get that actionable intelligence in about 20 seconds on his phone, submitted to a centralized system where other qualified people can see. And all we're doing here is setting some parameters, right, for that simulation. Whether that's time, whether that's duration, whatever it is, all the data is preloaded. It's got the 3-day weather forecast. It's going ahead, running the simulation, downloads it local to his device, and then he's got that fire. At the same time, it's determining the likelihood of containment, an initial attack assessment, and the impacts. Number of buildings, number of houses. So there's tools on the phone. You know, we're all familiar doing this on Google Maps. Well, now I can do it with my simulations, right? And I can have a look at those. I can play with it. I can animate it. I can step through it, right? More importantly, that's really nice and sexy. What I really care about is what's the potential impacts of this fire. Right away, I can see 15 poles, 24 buildings, if I can read it correctly, right, are going to be impacted. That's totally customizable per customer. You know, SDG&E cares about number of buildings, not their buildings. Any buildings it's going to take down, their distribution poles and their transmission poles, right? But we also, you know, when we get one fire, we get 10, right? So I need to know which one to pay attention to. So I want to do an initial attack assessment. We call this likelihood of containment. So without looking at my suppression resources, I can immediately have a look and I can see, based on the fire characteristics, how probable this one is to be contained or not. Do I need to worry about this one? Do I need to pay attention? And that's calculated on the fly, as you saw in about 20 seconds. And then it gives you a complete impact analysis. I see the consequence right away, right? I can look at it per hour. I can look at it in chart form. I can look at the details of it. I can walk per hour. I can see, in their case, independent pole number, what the materials of the pole are, right? I get it. I didn't have to overlay all this stuff. The word GIS never came into our discussion, did it? But you know, 5 years ago or 2 years ago, we'd all be telling you how we did this with GIS. But about interfaces, it needs to be seamless and it needs to talk the language of the end user, right? I need to know what all the inputs are, right? And then more importantly, I need abilities to share this. If you look there, we've built a separate app for leadership, for Caroline, for example. When the fire coordinators are doing this and they find a bad one and maybe there's a lot of potential damage to their assets, it's nothing to do whether they started it or not. It's just, is this fire going to cause damage to buildings around us? Should we get our local crew out there? Is it going to damage our assets? The fire coordinator, Randy Lyle, may decide, I better share this with Caroline. She needs to be aware. So we've built a similar mobile app for leadership that they can, once we publish this, they can consume that app, get notified, look at it, but of course they can't run any because, as Joaquin says, it's like giving 2 guns to a monkey, so I'm not even allowed to run them, right? So that's probably a bad analogy for Caroline, wasn't it? Yeah, sorry, Caroline, if you're here. But the point is, you want to be able to inform leadership, have that information at their fingertips without doing anything, but with the proper rights to review it. But it needs to be controlled by those people who really can interpret and understand it, whether that's the fire chief or whether that's the fire coordinator. So, last few slides before I end up here is, of course, Randy, first thing he does when he pulled over in the I-5 and did this, is that I think I've got a bad one here, and he calls in to Steve, right, in the EOC and says, have a look at this one. Steve pulls up his desktop version, and immediately, same fire because it got shared through a centralized server. Again, all this happened within 30 seconds. He pulls up the detailed analysis of the impacts and says, here's where I get all my rich full data. Yellow being our poles, and then different types, transformers, Z-poles, right? And I can see which ones are in there. Notice in the column, I can see the time it took to get there, what I expected to reach all of those individual assets, not just, oh, it's going to hit these one in this hour. I know the exact time, how long it's going to take, right? And I can walk through those. It charts it for me. I can also look at the ones on the periphery, because in this case I ran whatever it was, a 6-8 hour simulation, right? But I can see what's around me, not just what I consumed. So I can see how bad it is. Let's look at buildings. We color code this so you easily can see the difference between what you're looking at, right? And so they're the buildings within the fire. But look at all the buildings right on the edge. If this started at a different place or whatever, it could have consumed a ton of those, and so there are all the black lines there. So very quickly you can assess and remove that, and of course you can look at it and animate it and all that stuff. It's a full 4D environment, right? But it's, again, how do you deliver that data and how do you do that, right? First is the forecasting, and then it's on demand. So let's finish up with one slide about lessons learned, right? So we've been implementing this for about 5 years. I think we've been working with Brian and everything like this. Shortly, Edison and PG&E will also be running the same system, being able to do the same level of risk forecasting, being able to look in advance, be proactive, so they can quantify and make those decisions they need to make, right? So the technology exists, it works, right? And it's being implemented. We hear a lot about big data being an issue. It's not an issue. We've cracked that nut. You know, Scott in particular, working with SDG&E, have cracked that nut. Do we scale up and everything? Do we still need expertise like UCSD and others on the supercomputing? Absolutely. But big data is not an issue, right? There's lots of iron out there, and you can buy it, and it's cheaper and cheaper, right? And it does the processing we need. The fire spread modeling is just not an on-demand process. It's really about risk forecasting. It's about using it to look forward, not just be reactive for the current time. We've been doing that for 20 years, right? Everybody's been running Farsight for 20 years to look at their fires. It's about using this technology behind the scenes a gazillion times so I can see what's ahead of me, right? We see is the work that, in particularly, Adam and Jan Mandel are doing about coupling the weather and the effects of meteorology much better into the fire models. And so we're going to see a real enhancement in that. And so we're going to see these models get smarter about dealing with weather. One of the things Brian brought up early is these don't run in isolation. When he looks at his weather forecast and he looks at his SATI index, he can compare that against 15 years to say, this is the third worst day ever. We can do the same with fire if we model backwards. So we can do that reanalysis. So when I get a fire risk forecast, I can tell, wow, this is not only the worst this year, this is the worst 3 days I have in 10 years. And it provides context, that historical comparison. It's not just about technology here. This is a technical summit. I think what you've seen is it's about the blend of science, right? It's the subject matter expertise and technology. That's the complement that works here. It's just not technology. And last, again, it's data, 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 right? It's not location, location, location. It's all about good data. And in our case, it's about landscape fuels and live fuel moisture. I probably went over a little bit, sorry, but hopefully that gives you a layman's perspective about risk forecasting and try to tie some of this weather and this fire modeling stuff together. Thanks.
And now for our final lightning talk by Ilkay Altintas, director of the WIFIRE lab at UC San Diego at the Supercomputer Center, creating the next generation disaster intelligence cyber infrastructure through data and artificial intelligence. You've got this guy here.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. What a turnout today. I'm really happy to see everyone. And you might wonder, as you heard, I'm an infrastructure person from a supercomputer center. My background is in data science and big data, and we'll have to agree big data is an issue. So what am I doing here? As you heard all day, fire modeling requires different types of data, and this data comes together in what we call data-driven modeling. So that data-drivenness and the dynamic behavior of the fire is actually something that we can now use technology to capitalize on and bring science to use data in a way that we can advance science. So what we've been doing is we've been working with different types of fire modeling, weather modeling community, and data providers to create a cyber infrastructure. Why do we do this? Because all modeling and observational measurements are potentially useful, and how do we bring that to light in use of public for fire response or public situational awareness, or in general training and outreach to communities. What we heard today is a great example from SDG&E, creating fire potential index, weather modeling, fire modeling, together with Technosylva, great products. And some of it is localized for San Diego, some of it can scale to state. And we know some of these modeling products are localized, location matters. And in some of the weather modeling cases, for instance, this is a diagram from a tool called Firebuster. What you're seeing on the right here is northeasterly winds coming from the mountains to that Gabriel Valley, and that's known to be calm. And if you model weather at, let's say, 5-kilometer resolution, you'll see the strong effects of the wind in the valley. Whereas if you go down to 1-kilometer resolution for that location, you start seeing actually the calming effect in the valley. So that's what we mean when we mean resolution matters, and using the big data in a way, these measurements plus the models together to fit that resolution for the location, and scaling these models to different environments matters. What we also seen today is alternative ways of measuring things through these networks with cameras and weather devices, weather stations, and things like that. And they are now potentially being extended to the state through the scenic network. So we'll have a dense network, hopefully, of these weather stations and cameras for quick smoke detection, and over time looking at the fire and vegetation in different forms, which gives us an opportunity to analyze this data in different ways at the edge, what we call the edge. And when we take things to cloud and supercomputing platforms, it creates this continuum of computing, so to say, that we can take advantage of sensing big data technologies together with supercomputing and data science, so we can actually bring this data to its best available use, best availability for modeling. Another thing that we are observing is changes in the satellite technologies. We have partnerships with Planet, and these are imagery that is under a meter resolution. So through good use of this imagery, through use of machine learning and other techniques, we can actually model land cover and built infrastructure at a resolution that wasn't possible before. And combining it with field models creates an opportunity for us that, to have the data that we didn't have before. We can now actually identify Southern California fields at a resolution that wasn't possible before. Another thing that's up and coming is these alternative remote sensing technologies like LiDAR sensing. Here you see our models to actually overlay LiDAR imagery on a 3D platform, or things like sensing through aircraft. We had collaborations with General Atomics at an experimental level, but it was also deployed in a few of the fires to collect fire perimeters on an ongoing basis. These are the type of aircraft that flies above fire response zone. So they fly at 18,000 feet, and you can actually get fire perimeters on an ongoing basis and assimilate or adjust the fire models using these perimeters to create these real-time models. And then the challenge becomes, how do you communicate those products? We've seen an excellent example of that, communicating to different communities the output of these products and the data itself. So the data can be communicated as we heard, to fire response and fire behavior modelers, but it could also be communicated partially to public, maybe not the modeling products that predicts where the fire is going, but the products of the decisions based on that prediction. And it could be communicated to policymakers. There are so many different users of the data downstream that requires different interfaces and careful consideration of things like fairness, privacy, security around this data. So there's an opportunity here to create a data economy around disaster response and win as public-private organizations. So that's what we set out to do. Create an environment so we can create this neutral infrastructure that we can collaborate around models and data and create an infrastructure. So our question was, how do we find a way to bring together all data for all models and make it available to whoever needs to use it? Of course, we won't blindly make it available. We'll make it available in a way that the correct data gets to the correct user in a form that they can ingest and capitalize on this data. So if the state is working with a network data or model provider, there's an opportunity there to actually neutrally ingest that to a platform and make it available to whoever can use it with the right set of policies and metrics around those. So that's a solution we are proposing, to create a clearinghouse or a fusion center, fusion infrastructure that is intelligent. I'll explain what that means, and integrated. And it creates a catalog. It creates ways to curate data downstream. Of course, some of the data will come to us in polished form, some of it maybe not as much, to exchange and analyze this data, parts of it, and work with the community to analyze and model those further, and also to communicate. And I think if we do this, we'll have the data providers, and there's this knowledge layer in the middle that actually makes that data really, really suitable for building disaster intelligence technology. And it really democratizes this field and creates a collaboration environment that we can all win. And this threat around, whose network, whose data, whose model, that kind of goes away. We can actually all work together around a platform like this. So why are we thinking we can do this? We were funded by the National Science Foundation to create a prototype of this. We built a platform called WIFIRE. Now we are calling it WIFIRE Lab for All Hazards. And we built an infrastructure that communicates data to simple models and creates programmable interfaces to all data and automated ways to assimilate new data coming in, understanding the dynamics of the fire and assimilating into one particular model, in this case, the FarSight model, but it's built in a way that it can ingest any type of model and in the background scale these models. And there's a little bit of supercomputing there. That's definitely scale of supercomputing isn't an issue, but the main issue is this big data variety and resolution matchups, information uncertainty, privacy. All those issues related to big data are unsolved. Parts of them are solved, but I think if we all worked collectively, we can solve those issues quite tremendously. So an example of these capabilities, what you've seen in the last image was that infrastructure with workflows in the middle, and those workflows are sort of solutions, like think of them as little programs that run and automate the modeling and artificial intelligence and data management aspects of this work. Here what we are seeing is integration of high-resolution satellite imagery, just real photographs of the Earth, and turning those into classifications of land use, classifications of defensible space, or change detection over time. And this alone takes massive storage. It alone takes massive ongoing capabilities for running these models and learning from the data. But there are techniques for it. You can actually reduce the dimensionality of the data, reduce the complexity of the models, and make them runnable on a regular basis in an iterative way. You don't have to redo everything all at once on a regular basis. You can actually add to these things. And we think some of these techniques can help. How would you use it then, right? The planet data comes and it gets turned into, let's say, vegetation classification. And that goes into these workflows for, in this case, doing fire modeling with the rest of it, weather cameras, fire perimeters we are getting from the aircraft, and things like that. And it turns, in this case, into a map, an overlay of the fire behavior on a map. So that map that you've seen is in the Fire Map tool. This is a tool that we develop on top of those workflows and data infrastructure and the computing infrastructure with Los Angeles Fire Department. And it's now being used for initial attack and planning scenarios. It's a simple tool, but it's really a good way of communicating data that we have access to. And as I mentioned, there is room for all these different tools for different purposes. And you can create simple Santa Ana and real-time fire analysis. You can create ensembles and things like that. And it was used through Los Angeles Fire Department and some other departments in the Southern California area in operational form. And we had 126 fire agencies across the state work with us in friendly mode to look at it and use some of the products. So how do we link it all back to use of data? That's our main problem here that I'm actually trying to discuss. So remember those cameras that we've seen in the first panel today? We can actually create view sheds over these cameras. So when there's a smoke detected on that, we can geolocate that smoke. And let's say this is the camera image and this is a nighttime. Somebody can come here and say, okay, these are the markers. I'm seeing fire here. And those markers get communicated into the modeling platform. On a clear day, this would look like this. Let's take one marker there. And it gets communicated of what it's seeing at the Santiago Peak as a marker. And based on that, a fire model can be generated using near station or weather forecast or some other conditions, editable conditions that simple model for initial attack and for planning. And these models, of course, can be made more sophisticated, and we can bring more models into it so that we can compare ensembles and compare uncertainty of the model products and things like that. And that's the opportunity. Another data example I'd like to give is this partnership with General Atomics. This is an example from the Lilac Fire, and we did the same for Thomas and Woolsey fires through the fire camp. Here, what happens is, the moment the fire is there, the aircraft goes up, and we get perimeters on a regular basis from the aircraft. And those perimeters are actually being used, and at the same time we start the modeling. They are being used to compare what was modeled to what was measured about the fire and uncertainty of that measurement. And using that, we adjust the fire model. So basically, using these perimeter measurements, we are learning about the dynamics of the management at hand. And the model itself is improving itself. So it's a self-learning model at that point. So the physics is important behind it, but if you have better data, you'll have better models because you can actually make models learn what's going on and adjust themselves, assimilate these learnings into it. And the products that we generated was then communicated through those shape files and shared through many different ways, but this was one way of sharing through the state scout system, then it gets distributed to the fire response agencies through where it needs to go through. So these were all scenarios for modeling the fire, but what happens to the public? They're evacuated, they're out there. People don't know what's going on. There's a huge need, and I'd like to leave with that thought, everyone. Fire modeling doesn't mean we have to have access data only for fire modeling, and we have that data available. Knowing the uncertainty of the data, making temporal and spatial characteristics of the data right for ingestion into models, creating a data environment that privacy, security, and all those things that are related to policy is kept, so the data will not go in wrong hands at the wrong time. These are important. But what's most important, as we also heard from Chief Porter this morning, is public. They are evacuated, and once they're evacuated or they are in the way of harm or they're worried, there is not many interfaces that the public can go and look for situational awareness information. And during the fall 2017 fires, again, we are an academic research organization. We never advertised this. 800,000 unique users found it, our servers, via word of mouth. And then being a supercomputer center helps your things start scaling, and you can take advantage of cloud computing, edge computing, whatever you want to do. But 8 million page hits during one fire event. We are experiencing it at increasing levels at every major fire. So that shows the need of public for information. And I think we are all responsible for responding to that need. And I think this is a great environment to start understanding how we can also help public to feel better during these fires. Thank you.
So I'd like to ask the rest of the panel to come on up.
I'm gonna talk.
And just wait for me over time.
Okay. Where should I go?
If you're using it, can you do it without it?
I'll try.
Okay, so let's see. Great. Why don't you guys come too closer? Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, so just to synthesize what we just heard, fire modeling is the process of predicting where a fire will go. It's a very complicated process. It's incorporating a bunch of variables, and the purpose of modeling fire is to synthesize the complexity of that situation and understand what the future may hold. That informs a bunch of decisions. So we've seen 3 different scenarios in which fire modeling has been demonstrated in these talks. We've got the fire departments in Southern California, namely Los Angeles Fire Department, where FireMap was developed. We've got the utilities with Technosylva, and we also have this coupled atmosphere fire modeling done with computational fluid dynamics out of the University of Utah and Desert Research Institute. And so there's multiple purposes for those, including understanding where the smoke fallout would be in these large fires. So I'd like to start by asking about some success stories from each of our case studies. Why don't I hand it over to Chief Terrazas? I should also introduce the rest of the panel so that you all know who's here. Chief Ralph Terrazas, Chief of Fire, Los Angeles Fire Department. And you know Ilkay, who just presented. Joaquin is the president and founder of Technosylva, and we know Adam Kochanski from the presentation as well. Okay, so Chief.
Thank you, Jessica. Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon, everybody. I know it's late in the day, so I'll start off with a joke. What do firefighters and police officers have in common? When we were young, we all wanted to be firefighters. That goes over big with the firefighters, not so much with LAPD. I've been here all day, and I'm absolutely fascinated with the discussion. I want to thank the CPUC for holding this event. But the things that I heard, I think, are key. And I don't disagree with any of it. But the things that I want to emphasize is a relationship between the academic world and fire departments. Decision makers need to have indices that they can make quick decisions on. And we've had a version of a brush threat index in the Los Angeles City Fire Department for over 20 years. And I'll tell you one quick story. The first week in December of 2017, our brush index number came in at 266. That was a Monday of that week. And I'd never seen a number higher than 200. So I asked that they rerun the index to see, is that accurate? They came back and they said it was. So later that day, I had a meeting, a regular Monday meeting with Mayor Garcetti and other members of the large departments of Los Angeles City. And I told the mayor, our index today is 266. I've never seen that number. this could be a bad week. That Monday was the day of the Thomas fire, that night. We sent a strike team from LA City to assist, but I wanted to hold all our resources back because the index was still high for the entire week. So on Tuesday, we had the Creek fire, and we had 70 engines deployed at one time on that fire. Then on Wednesday, we had the Screwball fire near UCLA. We had about 40 engines deployed on that fire during that time frame. So the index is key. Whatever you're doing, whatever your discipline, at the end, think about the end user. We need it fast. It doesn't have to be perfect. The projection can be approximate, but the speed has to be fast, within minutes. In the Los Angeles City Fire Department, when we dispatch on a brush dispatch, we send a lot of people. We send all our available helicopters. There's certain areas of the city, we have almost 300 firefighters responding, and we'll be on scene in about 6 minutes. So the initial incident commander needs to know, where do I deploy my resources so they have the most impact? And looking at the WIFIRE projections, Jessica, if you could bring back the Screwball projection. And you'll see, near UCLA, that is a Sepulveda Pass, and the 405 freeway is on one side of that projection. It's on the west side. So within minutes, I was at our dispatch center. We ran the projection at our dispatch center, staying ahead of the chaos because people in the field do not have the time or expertise to do these calculations. As soon as we ran it and got the results of WIFIRE, we took a screenshot and I texted it to the mayor, to all the incident commanders, and I had a phone conversation with the incident commander about what the priorities are. What are the objectives? In this scenario, it was keep the fire on the east side of the 405. And the wind was coming from the north to the south. So we weren't worried about the north flank of this fire. We were worried about the southern flank. So we deployed our resources to the southern flank and to the eastern flank. We did lose a few homes. I think we lost 6 or 7 houses, but we stopped the fire. Our strategy since the Bel Air fire of 1961 is to hit it hard and hit it fast. We can't afford to let fires run for days because we'll lose too many lives and too many houses. One house in the Screwball fire could be $5 million. One life is immeasurable. So I'm a big fan of WIFIRE and technology, and I think it works for us because we have a relationship with UC San Diego. And I'm in a position to implement the technology and to provide Dr. Altintas with whatever she needed to refine her model, whether it be helicopter time, whether it just be SMEs in the room. And I'm very grateful for that partnership, so thank you.
Great, thanks. Joaquin, would you like to go?
Hello. Thanks for having me here. Success cases on using wildfire science and modeling. First, I would like to say that we've seen a lot of fire weather and weather modeling. Fire modeling is the youngest science related to all these problems that we have around us. We heard the numbers that Ed was saying at the beginning. Only 11 scientists in Canada. I wouldn't ask Matt what is the budget that you guys have now for fire research, but it is quite embarrassing. So it's not only the weather. I think that on weather there's a lot of knowledge, and everything that we see here is great, and it's fantastic, and we need it. But also we need basic science on fire, because it's a very young science. It just started in the 50s. We're still learning a lot. So the first thing that I would say is to get success, we need support to these guys. That's the first thing that I would like to say. In terms of success of being able to support the community, the people that is in front of the incidents, and trying to support in the worst moments of their lives to many of our citizens, we tried. That's the most challenging environment, because fire modeling could be used and should be used in advance, as Buck said before. We could explain to a community that they are exposed to this kind of a risk in advance and help them to be ready and to be prepared for the next evacuation or the next fire starting. So I think that is absolutely mandatory, and we can do it in advance. When we try to do it in real time, that is complicated because that is chaos. When somebody was telling me, can you model the campfire? And I say, well, you can model chaos, but it's freaking expensive. And it's going to take a long time, okay? So do we have models with this fire science that are supporting incidents in real time? Yes, we do. Okay, we have lots of examples. We have from Chile, in Las Máquinas fire, 600,000 acres fires in 2 days. And that was modeled in real time. In real time, I'm talking about 20 seconds to provide that answer. Nobody was killed in that fire. We had the fires in Mendocino. We have the EVAN that was there. And we have longer fires that can be supported in a quantitative way. We have the Mark Castenlow, who is the leading, probably the leader in Europe regarding extreme wildfire behavior. He was able to get the resources that he needed in La Junquera fire, a fire that was running 7 miles an hour, because he could support his decisions not in his experience, but in model that he had at hand. So are there many good cases of the use of technology? Yes. But I think that for me, the most important thing right now, and I think that the technology has demonstrated that it's good, that it could be better, we need the support for our people in the field to really understand and trust in this kind of outputs, because it's a really, really complicated business. So we need to support them, train them, provide them support from centers that can really give them the intel outside the fog of war, because we have fires, and especially in Southern California, in California, we're fighting fires that are running at a pace that is pretty incredible. So
Great.
That's it.
Thank you. Adam.
Well, success stories, I guess, one big success story from my standpoint is that this year for the very first time we were actually able to run in a pseudo operational mode those coupled fire atmosphere forecasts. And I'm telling you that's a success story not just because it was used by IMETS, for example, which I was even surprised that there is so much interest in that. But I remember just a couple of years ago, no one would even believe that just running operational coupled fire atmosphere model is even possible, and everyone was saying like, well, not in my life. Well, we are just maybe 5 6 years later. And it is reality. Is it something that maybe we don't have much experience with? Those are very new things that we just explore and we learn. They are not perfect by any means. But I guess the success story is first of all that we can do that. But I think the other probably bigger is that I see that there is attraction and there is an interest and some dialogue with people actually using those tools. And they really want to learn how to use them. They are interested, and I think that's super exciting. And for me, that's personally like a success story.
That's great. That's great. Yeah, and I want to point out too that the panelists were chosen because they're all operational tools, and that's also interesting. You've got your FAR sites, your Rothermel models, and you've also got the CFD modeling that's actually now being used operationally, which is a pretty exciting step. So on the flip side of that, what are some of the challenges that we're seeing using fire modeling? Who wants to start? Joaquin?
Yeah, I would say that the first challenge that we need is, I think that we need better data on fuels, and especially on fuels. I'm going to talk about fuels. Weather, I think we're getting okay, and especially we were lucky to be in San Diego where we have fire weather wonderland with the work that Scott and all the SDG guys, and then it's expanding through California. I think that we're getting there. Probably there's nothing better in the world like that. On the fields, we have a big problem. And actually, the simulations that we showed about the Tash fire were pretty accurate, and they were running like in 20 seconds. The problem that we have the campfire is that everything that was available was 8 years old. So we couldn't predict the fire behavior because all the fields were coming from the footprints of the previous Butte complex fire. It wasn't updated. So we really need in California, and actually nationwide, to support whatever project that is going to replace, evolve, or empower land fire, or empower your communities with a better understanding, a better definition of the fields in the landscape. We are working right now in the Angeles National Forest, And using USGS LiDAR data, we can define the WUI, the houses, the individual pole, the individual trees that is touching to a home, so we can say and highlight, okay, these guys are at risk. And that is technology that is out there. That is big data. That's, I agree. But it is not available. So when people challenges that, okay, you know, the models are not very good, please give us good data and we'll do a good paella with all of that, right?
So I won't call it a challenge, I'll call it an opportunity.
Excellent.
Because I think when we started, we were funded by the National Science Foundation, and only one project was funded. And it was for San Diego area, because we had a network of HPRAN network of SDG&E's dense weather stations, and we had a lot more data than the rest of the world to be doing fire modeling. And we said we can actually take that data and learn about the ongoing event from that data and then adjust the fire model. So if you have better data, you can do better fire modeling indeed. And using data, you can also simplify the models. You can reduce the order of these models, and you don't have to model everything anymore. Some things can be measured, some things can be modeled. And that combination, data-driven simulations, is the key, and that's an opportunity. And when we said we'll also get fire perimeter and assimilate that, a couple of people laughed at us at the time. You'll never get that data. And we met Chief Terrazas, and at that time I was trying to actually get some grant to fly an airplane over an existing fire, so we have a data set. And he said, you'll get all the helicopter time you need, every fire, I'll give you the data. And he enabled us, right? That's the opportunity. The challenge suddenly turned into an opportunity, and we happened to be doing the right research for it that National Science Foundation found valuable. So these opportunities exist, these challenges exist, and it's really recognizing at the state level and making sure data is available to anyone out there who wants to do this type of modeling. There are so many data scientists out there hungry for data, and they're ready to give these techniques. There are so many statisticians. There are so many machine learning people. And I'm getting in my inbox couple a week, people asking for data. We are giving, the better data or, whatever data that's openly available. We are actually providing that to the people who think they can actually look at it, analyze it, students, training. There's so much opportunity there, and there are currently challenges because we are not making the data available enough.
Jessica, if I could add, from the user perspective, firefighters typically retire after about 30 years of service. So our culture is slow to embrace technology. So my opportunity, I have people who were reluctant to use email. So when I introduce things like this, I'm speaking another language. The good news is that our younger people are embracing technology. We've hired almost 850 firefighters in the last 4 years. We have 3,500 total, so I got a way to go. But the old timers who resist technology are slowly leaving, and the younger generation is embracing this. And then we have to force it and use it at every opportunity. And once you have successes like the ones we shared with you, Skirball, then you get believers, and then there's a momentum. And now we just got to keep supporting that momentum with further developments and refinements and success stories.
Excellent. Adam, do you have any comments on challenges?
Well, I would say, yeah, I like what Joaquin said. Really, I see that there is, some kind of, gap, in terms of like a basic research. I mean, some, basic, principles, that we base, our, models on. I mean, those are like, principles and, some experimental, data from like, 50, 40 years ago. A lot has happened, since then, and I guess we all, would like to have like, better, understanding of all the processes, leading, to the fire propagation and so forth, and just, to learn how we can, simplify it, how we can use it. But, also, I think, another, challenge here is actually, data related. Yes, because, I mean, we have to acknowledge that, once we start, getting into more, and more, complex, modeling systems, our requirements in terms of data, will rise as well. So, the model is going to be only as good, as the data that we use as input. And if we, for example, start, going into like, coupled fire, atmosphere, modeling, well, it's not enough for us just, to know what the wind speed, for example, is, at the surface. We would like, to know what is the vertical, profile. We would need to have like a really some idea about three-dimensional atmospheric structure to be able to represent the whole process. So we are not there yet, and we don't even at that moment yet understand what processes occur during those large wildland fires, how they impact weather. I mean, what should we measure at what moment actually it becomes important, what we should look after. So I think there is a lot of kind of things that that we are looking forward in terms of data, and the good thing is that the new technology kind of provides that, and I really like WIFIRE and kind of the things that you are doing, because kind of integration data from multiple sources. I mean, that's really a key for successful modeling. So that's great, and also things that Craig showed with new technology in terms of remote sensing, all the vertical profiles of velocity that he can get, just localized weather observations that you could potentially then use in your model. I think there is there are also great opportunities there.
Excellent. So I'd like to move the conversation to policy and the public. So what are your experiences trying to communicate these risks using models to decision makers? And then on the flip side of that, what is your experience trying to communicate to the public? Sure.
There are several scenarios. One is during the incidents, and that's obviously, that has to be very clear to the public where they have to go to look for reliable information. So that's Callaway, yes, and everybody has to really educate our citizens where to look for reliable information, and I think that is done very nicely. In terms of explaining from the agencies and from the policymakers to the community what is the environment that we're living, okay? How can we live with fire? Because we have to live with fire. If we just think on fighting fire, there are some chances that we may lose, and we may lose really big time. We have to live with fire. We have to manage our landscape to make it more, our life there, or make our communities more resilient, okay? And to do that, we need the support. We need the support during the operation, so our firefighters don't need to be heroes. To be honest, I don't like when I see, the firefighters are heroes. Come on, they're public servants, and the heroes used to die at the end of the movie. We have to help them to do their job more efficiently. And by that, when I live in a community that is exposed to high risk, exactly as I'm exposed to flood risk, I have to understand properly how to behave when there is an evacuation going on, or when there's a ready, set, go moment. I do it properly in a safe way. Okay. The other way that we can explain the support that we need is very hard to sell fuel management and vegetation management, and especially in California, we have two big problems: clean air and prescribed burns. They have a big problem with we have a big problem with explaining to the community that it's better to bear a little bad quality air instead of having a huge problem with a big incident like we have had so many. So because what happened in the 80s, right now, I was reading up an article on the 50s, how 500,000 acres were burned every year in California. And we're about 20 times less now. And that's because our society is very adverse to fire and only sees fire as a bad thing. And I really like the quote by Ed, we use it too. Fire is a good servant, but it's a bad lord. We have to use fire more, as they do in Florida, as they do in the South, to do it in a safer way, educate our people. And with the modeling, we can educate our people, as Chief Fennessy asked us to show the people at La Jolla or in Carmel Valley, okay, guys, do you want this, or would you allow us to do some fuel management? To get that permissions, and also to get the support, to show if you invest $10 in fuel treatments, which are the benefits, economical benefits that you can get. Right? And that's what you can use the modeling to.
Jessica, as I thought about your question, I regularly communicate with Mayor Garcetti whenever there's a brush fire within the city or in close proximity to the city of Los Angeles. And I communicate by sending a WIFIRE projection. And I have to caution the mayor each time before he puts it on Twitter, because he gets thousands of hits, that this shows without containment effort. So he always puts that caption in there to ensure that we don't panic the public. So, and the other thing, that's how I communicate with policymakers. Now with the public, and it also involves the mayor, I'm often with him at press conferences at these large fires. And he takes all my speaking points, because he'll say the acres burned, the number of houses lost, the number of firefighters injured. So I'm thinking, what am I going to say? I don't have anything left. So at one of the fires, I shared the brush index. And I said, today's index was 266. It was a story I told you previously. And that generated a lot of discussion. And in the following days, we had a lot of media asking us about the contents of that brush index. How do we conclude that the number is whatever the number is? So I have to think about not panicking the public, to reassure the public that we got this, but I give the more specific information to the mayor. And thank God we've been fortunate that we've kept our brush fires to relatively small scale. We're different from CAL FIRE. We're an urban metropolitan fire department that runs 1,350 calls a day. And we take 600 people to the hospital every day. We have 106 fire stations. We deal with earthquakes, active shooters, high-rise incidents, shipboard fires in the port, aviation incidents at LAX. Brush fires is just one other thing that we do. We don't have an off-season, but we have to be very good at brush firefighting because of the threat we've had in the last few years. So once again, the technology has allowed our firefighters, it's giving us another tool to be more effective with our resources.
So in addition to agreeing with all of it, what's different is bringing back to data. You could actually, if you show people an image of the risk, they understand. And how you communicate that is important. If you show them, look, your neighbor has defensible space, and if actually it burns in there, his house won't burn, but yours can go under because you don't have the defensible space. If you can communicate that, people will manage their environment better. And the other thing is a program that I love from Australia. We worked with Victoria, one of the fire departments there. They gave sensor blocks to 4th graders, just something to manage environmental data. And these kids sort of man the sensors in their environment. They charted fire weather and things like that. And they started going to the churches and communities, teaching grown-ups fire weather and telling them about how fire resilience works. And instead of grown-ups telling kids what to do, the generation comes up with this, they tell their friends, they tell their environment. And we can create these programs. We can create actually awareness to create resilient environments. And Colorado had a great program called, I think, Fire Resilient Communities. And some of the communities there, just by talking to communities through the churches and things like that, they created the right defensible space, and they were able to reduce the harm from some of the fires.
Awesome. Let's see. Adam, do you have any experience working with the regulatory agencies?
Well, not much, but I think that Joaquin really touched on an interesting aspect, kind of just even having the models and being able to communicate like the output from those models and help make decisions in terms of prescribed burns. I remember like a couple of years ago we had a prescribed experimental burn with Craig. And it happened, to be under, red flag, warning. So so the fire marshal, visited us, and of course, didn't want, to agree, for this whole, experiment. So we showed him, the simulation that we did, ahead of time, for this, prescribed burn, and we said, hey, that's, what we expect. That's, how we are going to ignite it, and that's what we believe is going to happen. And he said, okay, and we did it. So, so I think there is, an opportunity here, for sure. And I think also, I believe that, as time progresses and we get, better and better tools, and people, will build some, confidence in these tools. I mean, it will be really, easier also, to take advantage of that. And some, of the problems that, Joaquin mentioned in terms of, prescribed burns, in California, I can imagine that it must be, really difficult, to make, this call and say, yes, let's burn it today because, the fire risk may be high, people, will be unhappy because, of the smoke, etc. But maybe, yeah, if we show, hey, we know what we are doing, that's, where the smoke is gonna be. You will be smoked just for 3 hours, and then you will be fine. Maybe they will have better attitude, and they will understand that okay, it's better just to be uncomfortable for a couple of hours than to have my house burned.
Right.
I just have to say this just to support a little Chief Terrazas and some of the agencies in the audience. One of the things that we did. Talking about fire is always giving bad news, right? How much houses were lost, how many acres were burned, how many hours of firefighting, how many hours of aerial resources. Always bad news. We can tell good news. We can show by showing the before of what the fire did and what the fire could do. We could show what you are saving. So you're spending 200 hours of your helicopters or your crews or whatever in this fire, but you're saving so many homes. So we started to do that systematically. The first time that we did it was for the Alabama State Forester. They had a $4 million budget cut, and we just prepared a report with back of 4 fires, what was lost and what was safe. It turned out that he received the call to say, okay, well, no, yeah, let's keep those 4 million. That was one case. The other case was in Chile. We helped to organize for the National Corporation, Forestry Corporation, the analyst units. Those guys, every fire that they go, they show what was lost and what was safe. And in the last 10 years, they had the 3 worst fire years in their history, and they've been good. The only problem that they have was the big, large cherry tanker. But they were good because they were explaining to the society where the dollars go, the pesos go, and what they were getting. Okay, that's also something that you can use the modeling for.
Awesome. I'd like to open it up to questions from the audience. So if anyone has any comments or questions for the panelists, please feel free to come up to the mics. There's 2. So one thing I didn't focus on, but maybe we could do some clarification for the audience, is where the different stages of modeling are good for, right? So there's planning, there's operational, there's scenario development, and we've touched on a lot of those pretty informally. Is there anything more that any of the panelists would like to talk about with respect to the different stages that fire modeling is useful for?
I think I might touch upon the science versus operational use, because, I think a lot of the fire modeling focus goes on real-time models and, quick turnaround, and because that's the operational use of it. But there's also a need for detailed physical fire models. I come from that world. I cannot deny it. We are using simpler models because what we tried to do was different. We wanted to do real-time data assimilation, dynamic data-driven models. But there's fire physics and understanding that, and just as an exercise, so it leads to better operational models, that's absolutely valuable. And I think the reason we are not discussing that now is because of the environment and technology we are in.
Great, thanks. Anybody else?
I would like to say only that there's a huge opportunity on the technology side in terms of the mobile technology. I would like just highlight that. We created an app called Wildfire Analyze Pocket for the community, just putting all the complex models there in a simple calculator. We have now 5,000 users that are having a conversation on the field of quantitative fire behavior. The problem that we have with fire behavior analysis and fire modeling is that it's a very complicated art and science. We don't have many people that is versed on that, and we are losing many of them because of the baby boom generation. There's a lot of F-bands. I know most of the F-bands that I know, except for Crystal and some others, they're retired. They're retiring. So that look of fire behavior on the field during a prescribed burn, even during an education for kids, try to show them, okay, look at the station fire, what it could do. That also a very nice use of the modeling.
Right. And through all this process, it seems that in the planning, in the operations, there's a component ultimately of education for all of the users. Okay, I'll start taking questions.
Yeah, hi, Ron Vidal, Mill Valley Fire. I just have to say, first of all, just thank you to the panel. Strong work. I mean, I think we should give these folks a round of applause. Just amazing work, right? I just want to key on one thing which you said, with that this is, fire modeling is the youngest science, right? So here's your magic wand. You get to wave it. Where do you want to be 3 years from now? At the current pace, where could you be?
I think all of you could answer that question, too.
Yeah.
Where we could be in 3 years? Well, 3 years is not that much time in a kind of research world. That's just getting to really knowing the problem and appreciating all the issues. But I think in 3 years, I guess. We should be able, well, we won't be able to run like, Monte Carlo type of, simulations with, coupled atmosphere, fire models. And I think that there is probably at that moment we can kind of live with, without it. But I think we will be able to really take advantage of those kind of integrated systems and trying to go even beyond a little bit in terms of integrating that also with like air quality warnings related to wildland fires and all things related to that. I think that's absolutely possible within 3 years. Especially if it goes kind of hand in hand with new measurement data and observations collected during the wildland fires that will allow us to actually understand what we are dealing with. Because without that, I mean, it's really hard to build the models. It's really hard to do any validation. So the data, and I believe we will have the data in the future because technology is there. So we should be able to really to make a progress. And I believe that like 3 years from now, I mean those things that I was showing as a kind of prototype. I hope we will have that actually implemented at some places, and that there will be people actually using that on a daily basis as a decision support tool.
I'd like to, if I could add, I was thinking about your question. In 3 years for us, predictive analytics. Mm-hmm. If we get more accurate with projecting the threat for brush fires, when I fully staff for the next day, it's $250,000 per day. Mm-hmm. Same thing for rain. If there's a half-inch of rain or more in the city of Los Angeles, we're 20% busier. So I staff up additional ambulances. Same thing for high temperature days during the summer. I know that certain parts of the city, our transports are going to go up. So we staff up that way. If we can make predictive analytics more accurate for not only brush fires, but rain, heat-related events, we could be more efficient with the public's money.
Yeah, you've got a better response capability.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah, I would like to say that in 3 years, I would like that every small fire department in California, every small homeowner in California is very well informed before the fire happens, or if a fire happens, mm-hmm. with the right amount of information, not to intoxicate them with too much, not too few, to take the right decision, whether it's for doing their their medication plan allow the community, or the evacuation in the small fire department, because not everybody is so big as LA City. We have the small communities out there. So I think that as a state, I think has to be done. It could be done. And for that, the technology is one side, but for me, the most important thing is the human factor. So as Chief Porter was saying that there's a lack of firefighters, he needs more. I think that we also need more analysts supporting all this kind of data and to support to the smallest corner of California.
Okay.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
I can say something, but let's get more.
Okay. Michelle.
Hi, Rochelle Trong, former FCC and PUC commissioner. I wanted to talk for a minute about what I'm going to call the invisible infrastructure, which is the communications networks that all of this runs on. I know that there were a few of us in that room the day that GeoLinks and CNIC and other leaders from the university internet system, there was this envisionment that we would create a mesh network that would help spot these fires, and that we would pool all the assets of the state and the universities and the IOUs to try to figure out how we get ahead of these wildfires. So now I can see that we have the science, the technology, we have experience to deliver it. So how do we now move to the next step to bring what we learned in San Diego and LA up to the rest of the state? How are we going to fund it? Where are we going to collect these assets? Do we have enough spectrum to run the wireless data sensors that we need? Who is working on those issues? Because I heard earlier President Picker say, well, you know, PUC doesn't have enough jurisdiction over a lot of the telecom carriers to do that piece of it. So, you know, is the FCC helping us? I haven't seen them here helping us. So what are we going to do to get the invisible infrastructure and the communications networks and the funding to get the mesh network that we've been talking about in all the high fire areas?
I can tell you from LA City Fire Department that when we saw the effectiveness of WIFIRE, we immediately, or I started making some phone calls to LA County Fire, San Diego, Orange County, Ventura, and we agreed to subsidize the WIFIRE. It's just too important. We kick in $25,000. This is our first year because the grant just recently ran out. But I'm in a good position that I don't have a lot of bureaucracy. It's good, we need it, let's do it. And that's where we're at. I think we need to expand it to the state to do it, because this is a statewide, actually around the world, it's a benefit for WIFIRE. But we found it to be extremely useful for us, and we paid our share to keep it going.
I fully agree with your sentiment that I was in the room when the first idea about the statewide network came, and having access to data and having access to models on the other end of data being used and models are communicated out to the field is absolutely important. And I think an opportunity again here is not, you know, create X model versus Y model, get X data versus Y data, but create an environment around communication, around networking, around sharing that we could actually make a difference as a state and be the example to the rest of the world, because we can. I think California State is uniquely enabled to make use of technology. We have all the technology in the world in the state. And you know, how do we make that integrated? How do we solve problems together through technology, modeling, data sharing? And tools will come, the economy will come, and little fire departments that we talk to who don't have behavior analysts, you know, they can't afford it, so they are using it on the back of a few fire departments right now. And I think if we had the right data environment, those tools can be freely available and shareable and paid by larger entities in the state.
I just would like just to add, just to make everybody aware, in the wildfire arena, we'll take anything that the state could provide us. But as today, we're fighting fires without knowing what the fire is, we're fighting fires without knowing where the firefighters are. as today in the whole US, mostly the whole US. We don't know, we don't have trackers. Do we have GPS trackers out there in REI that takes $1? Yes. Are we using it? No. We're relying everything on radio communications, mostly in radio communications. That is going to change shortly, hopefully, but still we're not there. We still are not there. We try to invent that, and I like the slide of that pine tree with a telephone, because it was needed. It was really needed. You need data on the field, and you need all that information has to be delivered. But as right now, before running, we really need to start walking. And walking is we need satellite tracking of wildfires, but not every 12 hours like the BIR satellite. We need it every 15 minutes, and it could be possible. And we need tracker firefighters, and everybody, every agency has to be able to see the same common operational picture in the same place. So we don't have to take decisions based only on the radio working or not, because 40% of the communication in an incident by radio is to know where things are. Where are you? Where is this? Where are you? Where is this? And we're still not there. But that's it. That's the reality.
Okay, we have one last question, and we're way over time. Sorry about that. So,
I really thank the panel for a very enlightening discussion and moving forward on possible good technologies to capture wildfire. Just as I'm about to ask the question, I think Joaquin already started answering some parts of it. I was going to ask if you had today the information of all these wildfires, the recent ones that happened, where the location and the severity, the nature of the hazard, and the time of occurrence, say 1 year back, how would you have planned your activities? How would you have planned your resources? And the same question, like if today we are able to make a prediction 1 year ahead, how are you going to use that information in your mitigation efforts?
I would use it to educate our population, to educate our public first. Because fighting fires that fire behavior, we don't fight them. You just go with them till you have an opportunity, right? Flames over 10 feet high, you're gonna do direct attack. You're gonna go suppress them. You just have to find your opportunity. So the type of fires that we have right now, okay, what we have to do is educate again our populations, our citizens, our planners, not to put low developments in the wrong places. And if they are there, hold them and tell them, okay guys, exactly as my daughter, I'm pretty sure that there's a gun event in the high school, they're gonna perform well, and they're gonna know what to do because they train every year.
Correct.
We have to do the same with our communities that are exposed to this kind of risk. And these tragic examples have to help us, everybody, that is not about the ignition, because to be honest, ignition are gonna be a random. It's gonna be, one day it's gonna be the utility, and one day it's gonna be a kid with some matches. The spread is what is, we have a problem of fire spread, big time, with the fuel accumulation, with the drought, and the climate change. That's the problem that we have, and that is not changing. So help them to say, okay guys, here's where we're living. Let's get ready for that.
Thank you.
So I agree, and I think another part of it, making fire community, science community to use the data so better models can be generated. But also, if we had data about every inch of every city about the fire, it's not also ideal. We need to find the right way of reduce the dimensionality of the data, so we actually serve the data in a way that's ingestible, useful, so more can be done with it. And that will be training interfaces, that could be communication interfaces, that could be communications to the decision makers. There's all kinds of ways of using that data, but really we need to build things then to reduce the dimensionality of the data, so that's understandable, that's useful.
Yeah. Thank you.
do you want to say anything?
Well, I think there is a lot to be learned from the data collected for the past events, and from the modeling standpoint, being able to verify all the forecasts, identify where we have problems, when the model didn't perform as we expected, learn from that. I mean that's very valuable. So absolutely, I mean that's something that I would love to see as a kind of new routine in the model development. That it's not like the end of the road once the product is kind of released, but we kind of learn each year we have new cases that we can look at. We understand more the whole process, and we just try to incorporate this new knowledge in our models just to make it better. And even like the last 2 seasons, I think they opened our eyes to new things and new processes that we didn't believe were important. We didn't consider them important, and now we are trying to look at things like those downslope winds. We're not that interested in them. Now we are looking into that. We are looking into how those downslope winds interact with the fire itself. What kind of coupling we have there. How much the fire actually impacts local weather and all things related to that. So retrospectively, looking at historical data, in many cases that's actually the only way to learn about the physics, and that's the only way to extract from all the data the actual information that we can then use to improve our forecasting capabilities in the future.
Chief, I was going to say, to add an extra twist to that last question, your experience with the Woolsey fire, which hasn't been discussed much today. Do you have anything you want to share about that experience?
The Woolsey fire started in Ventura County and burned through LA County to the ocean. Our involvement, we were an assisting agency. We sent 50 engines within the first few hours. Going to the point earlier about what we saved, all of our resources were dedicated to Bell Canyon. And if anybody's familiar with that, it's a box canyon. There's about 800 houses. We lost 35. So we saved 765. We intentionally wanted to be on the eastern flank of that fire because that was the buffer between the fire and the city. And there was a projected wind shift about to occur on one of those days, and it was going to blow back into LA City. So my direction to the incident commander was not to let that happen. Simple as that. All our helicopters, our bulldozers, our hand crews, our engines, we did that. I do think any fire department on the planet could not have stopped that fire. LA County Fire did not have the resources in proximity, and the ultimate solution, I believe, is increased brush clearance, more firefighters, and building standards that are more fire resistive.
Thank you. Is there anybody on the panel that has any closing words? No, it's 5:30. So thank you very much oh, yeah, go ahead, Kristen.
My name is Kristen Allison. I work for the Angeles National Forest. And I think that one of the other things that I think that would be really good for this group to get to our understanding is aggregating all the data that we actually have available.
Yep.
And I think that that's one thing that we haven't really talked about. We've talked about big data. We've talked about lots of different resources in which to get it. But there are many choices. And we don't have a really good place right now as a clearinghouse to be able to aggregate that information, allow people to make the best choices for their particular needs. And I would stress that to get involved with those organizations at a level, and I hope that we can come together and dovetail that and create like Alima said, about a clearinghouse where people can actually understand what is available, what work is already done, create efficiencies, and stop doing the duplication in the silos.
That's great. Do you have any specific questions? No.
No.
So does anyone want to make a comment about that?
I do have a closing comment. Are we ready?
Yeah, we're there.
Well, thank you. What I heard today and what I heard here now was a group of very passionate people. I tell our firefighters, excellence occurs when an individual recognizes an opportunity and pursues it with a passion. And I encourage all of you, no matter what the obstacles are, keep that passion and figure out a way. Figure out a way to fix that problem or to get funding or to make a relationship with the fire department. We have to be optimists about this. We can't be a victim. And I think by having that attitude, it'll move us all forward together. Thank you for having me here today.
Thank you very much. Thanks, everybody. Oh, please keep your badges. Make sure you don't lose them for tomorrow.